right. So let's launch now into another strategy here and lesson using the triple note tote. Basically, go to the topic, details that you need to know, finding some way to remember it. Again, not necessarily doing it for things that you don't need support in with memorizing. Okay, so for the objectives, recognizing the importance of taking effective notes, right, and remembering that information, organizing ideas from an article using triple note tote, and then, of course, again, creating the memory strategy, mnemonics to help remember what you need to emphasize in your studying. Okay, so looking at one of the articles that we have, Tierra del Fuego, we're not going to actually spend time on this, but again, doing this in a way that kind of pulls them into something that again, you don't want to really test them. You want it to be non-threatening, but just kind of showing them how this can work. You can also use a funny article, write something from like our cartoon or something relevant to them, or have them even come up with something. And there's a lot of different variations of this. So reading about Tierra del Fuego and then basically asking them, hey, where are these things located? What is a fjord? All of these kind of things. And then ask them, how much did you remember of that? And by the way, did you take notes? And why would notes have been helpful here, right? So especially kind of going in with something, having sure the details are not something they would ordinarily completely know, to be like, hey, there is something that can help you. It's not something that is like, oh, you have to do this because a teacher's telling you. Like, this is actually something that will be a friend to you that will help you be less stressed, help you be happier in the long run. Okay, so having a discussion, right? When do you take notes? What type of note-taking strategies do you use, right? And then how do you use your notes to study? A lot of students will really not have a strategy until they develop one. It's just not something they see it as an extra step, or if they're feeling tired, or they don't know quite what to do with it. They don't know which things to prioritize. So again, modeling it, teaching it, discussing it, having them evaluate what's worked and what hasn't worked. All right. So as an activator, basically you can give them this handout, right, of the different pieces and then have them cut these, little squares out and then put them in the columns that they belong in. So let's take a look at the finalized project, right? So you've got a topic of tools, right? Then the details would be the types of tools. Now notice later on, we're going to talk about how this could actually become topics for paragraphs, right? And then having the pictures. So teaching them categorization again, we covered that last time as well. But now using it to again study to do more writing, all of that. So categorization is super important.
That was the elementary activator.
Yes. Yes,
I
thank
mean,
you.
it's obvious when you see the blue, it's the elementary, but I just want
Exactly.
to
Yes,
point that
yes,
out.
yes. Okay, so using it. So you've got topic, right? Writing the word or the concept that you're trying to remember, right? So let's take a look at this word derailed, right? So again, that's something that is not a word that they would necessarily come upon that often. And then we've got another concept of the formula for slope, y equals mx plus b. So the details, you basically put in the definition or the concept. And now the fun part is some sort of study strategy, right? A trick. So for derailed, right, you can have a train going off the rails, and I like to draw the letter D in the front of the train, right? So derailed. Now this shows you that this may not be something that everyone would feel is helpful, but you get this kind of stuff from students, or again, showing you that this has to be very individualized, right? So y equals mx plus b. So you've got y does M for Mary cross, right? So now you've got Mary cross, the crossing of the X, love, because you do like, hey, I'm with that person, Bill, right? So a student could come up with that and you say that's amazing, right? Because again, that clicks for that student. There's a reason they came up with that. So we want to embrace whatever they come up with. All right. So now we've got, say, the rock cycle. So igneous rocks. So you read this, there's all this different information, and you give them questions. Okay. And basically, hopefully they've done some of this work. Or again, if this is one where you want to say, hey, now let's look at how we could have organized this as a way for you to remember it, right? So igneous rocks, cooling lava, you draw the lava, that lava is so ignorant,
Mm.
right? Crystal size controlled by temperature, and you have these crystals actually sweating, right? Which is really fun because that's never like really gonna happen, right? And so that kind of is kind of funny, right? And that could stick. Sedimentary, made from smaller pieces of rock, sand, clay, and a small stone saying, hey, I'm Terry, right? And then metamorphic, heat and pressure create a new kind of rock, heat, right? Ick, and then you just kind of like whatever. Again, this may not appeal to you, but if it appeals to a student, then that's great.
I typically I'll meet with students. I'm going to be meeting with a new college student soon, actually next week. And one of the questions I ask them is, so what strategy do you, what do you, strategies do you use to study? And what do you think I hear? So sometimes, I hear about strategies, or a lot of time, particularly in middle school and even high school, I'll hear, I don't really have to study. I just remember, right? Or, yeah, I read my notes. I just keep reading my notes over. Sometimes in college they say that too. Or, yeah, well, I filled out the study guide, you know, and that's a pretty good start, right? We talked about that in another session. It's a good start. It's not the end all and whatnot. But what are all these students doing? They're using memory as a crutch. And again, for just letting someone in, for
Okay.
for some of our students, that's going to work to a certain point, but then it's not going to work. In high school, it's not going to work.
Right.
And they're going to get to college bio and forget about it,
Mhm.
right? They are going to sink because there is so much information in terms of being able to study. So this is really simple, to the point, PPCQ, and this is what we can teach them. So the first P is for plan. And I begin by talking about there is a life cycle to a test taking, correct? But our students tend to see a test as an isolated event. I take the test and then that's done and I'm moving on, right? It's a test. I hate taking tests. It's unpleasant. And they kind of put it out of their minds. But we need students to begin to understand that there are strategies, first of all, for studying and teaching them, the what and how of studying for a test, no matter what subject they're studying for. And that every time a test is assigned, the students should learn to ask themselves, what active strategies am I going to use to learn this information? What is my plan? How am I going to study? And then we're going to talk about when they get the test back, how am I going to reflect on that, learn from my mistakes so that I can do better next time? What did I learn from that experience? So the first P is to plan. And you decide, depending on the test, am I going to start 2, 3 days? If it's during finals in college, maybe it's 4 or 5 days. You figure that out. That's the first P. The second P is to prioritize. We talked a lot about prioritization. And so now I know what the test is going to be on. How am I going to prioritize? What do I already know? What information do I already know? Do I own? Have I mastered? What information am I feeling a little bit iffy about? And what is information? It's as if, I don't know, was I sitting there that day? I have no idea. I need to spend more time reviewing that. Uh, Then we go to C. You have to do something active, something active. You got to manipulate the information in some way. And reading isn't good enough. You either need pen to paper or typing up or, doing something with it. And we just learned about triple note tote. So creating a triple note tote or strategy flashcards is an ideal way to take that information, make it your own, and manipulate it in some way. And that guide is going to focus on the information that was particularly tricky for you to remember and understand. Remember, we're not making 50 note cards if we know 30 of the words or 30 of the concepts. We're only doing for those that we really need to study. And then, of course, and this is very important as well, quiz yourself. So you've made the study guide, you've manipulated information, you've made it your own, and now you have to do something with it. So you can do that yourself. You can be part of a study group. You can have a parent quiz you. Online, there are these online games you could use with your information you made, but make sure that you've quizzed yourself in terms of that. And the other thing I'm going to say, we'll move on, is taking a test is an opportunity to find out how you best learn. And when they get the test back, most everyone wants to kind of put it aside. And we talked about the top 3 hits. But we want them to do something with it. Let's look over the test, and this can be painful for some of them. And what have I learned from the situation? And we have to let them understand that if you don't do that, if you don't reflect, you're missing a key point in this learning process. So again, as I said, we're going to put the test date down. I'm going to decide with them. And as a class, in middle school, high school, I would do this together. What makes sense? When are we going to start studying for this? And how are we going to break this down? I'm going to prioritize. I do this with every one of my students. It doesn't matter what grade they're in. If they're in 4th grade, if they're in middle school, if they're high school, in college. We take the information and we color code it in some way. Sometimes it's with highlighting. Sometimes it's just with a colored pencil. Sometimes it's just with a symbol. A check mark means I know it. A squiggle means I need to really review it because I haven't quite mastered it. And maybe, an exclamation point or something that means, oh my goodness, I've never seen this before. I better really, really study this. So you want them to take their information, their study guide, their notes, whatever it may be. And again, I would do this as a class first because it's going to be different for everyone, and say, okay, what do you already know? Put a little green highlighter next to it. What do you think you need to revisit? Because it's now a little murky, yellow. And what do you really need to spend your time studying? Maybe it's a pink marker. Again, you're helping them prioritize their study time, not rereading the notes over 7 times, not just looking over the PowerPoint slides you might have shared with them, but deciding for themselves what makes sense. How do I need to prioritize in terms of that? And then you have to somehow do something with it. We just saw the business law school triple note tote, which was one of my students, and that is what he created. And then later he went back and did the mnemonics for those things that didn't work. All right, I'm going to ask you to think about, and it's delineated by birthday, but truthfully, I don't know when your birthdays are, so you can actually choose the example that you want to do. So either think about PPCQ and just on a scrap piece of paper, jot down some of the steps of planning, prioritizing, creating something, and then being able to quiz yourself, PPCQ. What would you do if you're in algebra for an algebra test? Maybe there's an algebra teacher out there. If you're an English or language arts teacher, a book test on Romeo and Juliet or another novel. If it's a geography test on Africa or some sort of geography test, or perhaps you're helping that student with their driver's permit test. So think about that. Take a couple of minutes on that in terms of that. Like, how would you do that? And again, we've mentioned many times, it's good to model. So as you're teaching PPCQ and after you've taught it, and maybe you've done it together as a class on that next test that's upcoming, you could share with them. It's like, oh, well, this is how, I envisioned, or maybe it's something that you had to, I don't know, if a test you had to take or something you had to do, share with them how you broke it down to PPCQ. In the interest of time for now, you can kind of continue doing that, but I am going to move on to that. But again, you can finish this on your own time. I do like us as teachers to have models to share with our students. Here are some examples from the past of what teachers came up with. So for pre-calc, and that's the midterm, you're going to be planning 2 weeks out, and they're prioritizing and they're taking the practice test, and within the practice test, because the teacher supplied one, then you should do that red, yellow, green, what you already know, what's a little murky, and what you really need to spend time with. You can correct the test. You're making a reference sheet or a triple note tote, and then you're quizzing yourself and you're doing even more practice problems. History test, it's a week out. We do the red, yellow, green again. You're making the Quizlet or note cards, maybe those cartoons and associations. Maybe you're rewriting your notes with those symbols, and then going back to the teacher because you have some questions, and then creating practice Quizlet, testing yourself, and making sure you're going over the class review. And then for a French test or a foreign language test, again, a week out, sort the vocabulary, you get the idea. And again, the student's going to be doing this for themselves in terms of what makes sense for them. These are just possible breakdowns. So just to kind of sum up, it's what's important is for you, and if you can get your gen ed colleagues to build this in as part of the study guide. Many teachers give out study guides, correct? And they ask the students to fill them out. They have to turn in as part of the grade, and PPCQ could be part of that as well. What is your plan? What is your PPQ steps? What are your steps? And they can hand that in, and that can actually be an assignment. So they're going to prioritize, they're going to categorize information, what they know, what they know they're kind of not needing to spend time on, what's a little murky, and what's really not solid at all. They're going to teach mnemonics, active study strategies, and oh, I love this. I love when teachers, it's so clever. We're so clever sometimes. We say to the students, you can walk in with a 5x7 index card. Sometimes it's an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, it depends. And you can create a cheat sheet. So basically, on one side, whatever you can get on that one side, you may bring in for the test. Oh, students love this. And I love this because it makes my job when I'm working with them so much easier because they, in fact, what do they have to do? They have to prioritize. They have to, what don't I really know? And the act of actually making the cheat sheet, what happens? They learn the information. So many times we hear from the students like, oh my goodness, I didn't even have to look at it. So we're kind of making them, it's a tricky way of making them to really sit down, prioritize, and pick out that salient information of what they haven't yet mastered. And in fact, in the process, they've mastered the information. I'm going to show you some examples here. This is a teacher created study guide. I love it. Here, this is what she created for the Mesopotamia study guide. Review each, she's telling them you need to review a little bit each night. Some ways that I review best are, and the student's able to choose that, and is really telling them where to focus their attention. I love it. Just very, very good. This I love. Doesn't this look like a teacher created? Very official. A college student created this. I love this. So he created this study guide, and it looks very official, very professional in terms of helping him what he needed to focus in on. And I love the checklist there. And this is something I do with many of my students in a one-on-one setting. And, this is totally, you can make it your own and make it for your student. The steps to take, depending on the student and what they're studying, the subject, we decide what are the steps you need to take, and we write that in as a checklist. And then you see I've got 3 columns. There's passive strategies, which, they're okay to use sparingly. There's more active strategies, which are better, and then there are active strategies with feedback, which are the best. So first we're going to decide on that plan. Do I start 3 days, 2 days, 1 day? You can make it even longer. What strategies you're going to use on those days. And then we're getting back to that estimation. How much time do you think it's going to take? How much time should I allocate for this? Oh, the first day, 3 days ahead time. Oh, I've got to make that study guide. Maybe it's going to take me an hour, et cetera, et cetera. And then they have their own checklist to work that off. So that's just a way to individualize it for a particular student.